Montana Territory, 1879. The sun had just dipped behind the Bitterroot Mountains when the deal was about to be made. Keziah Barnett stood in the dirt yard behind the saloon in Darby, her hands tied in front of her, wrists raw from the rope. Her cotton dress was torn at the hem from being dragged out of her family's wagon, and her eyes burned with fury and disbelief. She was 20 years old, and her brothers were about to sell her like livestock. "I told you we can pay the debt this way," her older brother Clyde said, puffing out his chest like he was proud of it. "She's young, strong, and got all her teeth," the other brother, Silas, added with a sneer. The man they were talking to was twice their age, with greasy hair and a mouth full of yellow teeth. He looked Keziah up and down like she was a heifer on auction. "How much?" the man asked. Keziah's stomach turned. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear over it. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving them with gambling debts and a failing horse trading business. Ma had followed soon after, worn out from grief. Since then, the boys had been drinking through whatever was left, and now they wanted to trade their own sister to clear what they owed. "Get your damn hands off her." The voice was low, calm, but sharp enough to cut through the thick summer air. Everyone turned. A man stepped out from the alley beside the saloon. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with sun-darkened skin and dark blonde hair under a weather-worn hat. A Colt revolver rested easy at his side. His eyes clear and steady, locked on Keziah's. She had never seen him before in her life. "What's it to you?" Clyde spat. The man kept walking forward, slow and sure. "You boys are done here." Silas reached for a knife at his belt. The cowboy drew his gun faster than Keziah could blink and fired one shot into the dirt between Silas's boots. "Try again," the cowboy said. "See how fast I load the next one." Silas froze. Clyde cursed and backed off. The man turned to the greasy buyer. "Go." The man took one look at the revolver and scuttled off like a kicked dog. "You have no right," Clyde snapped. "I have every right when a woman's being treated like a sack of grain," the cowboy answered. He holstered the gun and stepped to Keziah. "Do they have any claim to you?" She shook her head hard. "None. My parents are gone. They're my brothers, but they don't speak for me." "Then you're free." He pulled a knife from his belt and cut the rope at her wrists. Keziah gasped as her hands came free and her blood started again. The relief hit her like a wave. She stumbled and he caught her gently by the elbow. "Name's Lawson O'Malley," he said softly. "You all right?" She looked up at him, blinking. "Keziah Barnett." Lawson tipped his hat. "Keziah, that's a good name," Clyde growled behind them. "You think you can just take her?" "I am not being taken," Keziah snapped. "I am leaving." Lawson turned to the brothers, deadly calm. "You come after her again, I will end you. Try me." They stared at him and the steel in his eyes and then turned and stormed off, kicking up dust as they went. Lawson looked back to Keziah. "Do you have anywhere to go?" "No," she whispered. "Not anymore." He studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He opened it and took out a silver ring with a turquoise stone set in the center. He held it out to her, her breath caught. "What are you doing?" "I do not believe in halfway fixes," he said. "I was raised to do right by a woman. If you want protection, I will give you more than that. I will give you a name, a home, and my hand if you will take it." Keziah stared at him, stunned. "You do not know me." "I know what I saw. You stood alone, you did not beg, and you did not cry. That tells me enough." She looked at the ring in his hand. It was not flashy, but it was clean and carefully made. "Honest, like him, you are serious," she said. "I am." Her hands were trembling. She had been dragged out here, ready to be sold like a mule, and now she was being offered safety, not just that, but something far gentler. A home. A future. She looked back toward the road where her brothers had gone, then to the man in front of her, Lawson O'Malley. Keziah reached out slowly and took the ring. "Yes," she said, his shoulders relaxed with something like relief. "All right, then." He took her hand, slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit, as if it had been waiting. "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded. "I have a horse and a cabin outside town. It is not much, but it is mine. Let me take you there." He offered his hand again. This time she took it without hesitation. They rode out together, the heat of the day fading, the air cooling. Keziah leaned slightly into him as the chestnut mare carried them along the tree-lined trail toward the hills. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in months she felt safe. And in the quiet space between them, something warm had started to bloom. The trees gave way to a narrow clearing just as dusk bled fully into night. Lawson dismounted first, tying the reins to a cedar post near the porch. The cabin stood squat and sturdy, its log walls dark with age, a single lamp glowing faintly in the front window. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, the scent of pine and wood ash lingering in the breeze. Keziah slid down after him, her feet hitting the ground with a wobble. She steadied herself before he reached for her. "You've got a limp," he said quietly. "Sprained it last week," she replied. "Didn't get time to rest it right." He nodded once. "There's a stool inside, sit first." "I'll bring water." She followed him in, ducking beneath the low beam of the doorframe. The room inside was clean, if plain wool blanket folded neat on the cot, rifle resting in a wooden rack by the hearth, cast iron pans hung on pegs near the stove. A pot steamed gently on the back burner, scent of beans and onion filling the space. Keziah settled onto the stool, biting back a wince as she lifted her foot. Lawson poured cool water from a clay jug into a tin basin, setting it beside her before kneeling to remove her boot. "You don't have to," she began, but he was already easing the leather off, careful not to tug. Her ankle was swollen, the skin tinged purple. He wet a cloth in the basin and began to wrap it around her foot. His hands were work-worn but gentle, and he didn't speak until the cloth was tied off. "I'll fetch willow bark tomorrow from the creek bend. Helps with pain." She looked at him then, really looked. His jaw bore the shadow of days without shaving, and lines had settled around his eyes from years spent outdoors. There was something unhurried in the way he moved, as if nothing could rush him unless he let it. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Have for 3 years. You don't get lonely?" He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a towel. "I don't mind quiet, grew up with too much noise." "This suits me." Keziah watched him ladle beans into 2 chipped bowls. He handed one to her, then sat across the small table, resting his forearms on the wood. "Where'd you come from?" she asked. "Born in Missouri, drifted west after the war. Worked cattle south of Helena, then bought this place off an old trapper when his lungs gave out." "You fought," he nodded once. "Union side." She didn't ask more. The way he said it left no room. Instead, she took a bite of the beans, warm and earthy, a hint of salt pork beneath the onion. Lawson didn't speak again until she was halfway through the bowl. "You still wearing the ring?" he said. She glanced down. The turquoise caught the firelight. "I said yes. I meant it." He leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady but unreadable. "You don't owe me anything, Keziah. Not for stepping in, not for supper. If you want to change your mind, I'll take you to the church in Hamilton. Pastor there's got kin who'll take you in, no questions." Her spoon paused mid-air. "Do you want me to go?" "No," he said, so simply it made her chest tighten. "But I won't keep you out of obligation." She set her spoon down. "You saw what they were willing to do. I didn't have a choice back there, but I have one now." Lawson nodded slowly, and something eased in his face. "I can help," she said. "I know how to mend and cook a little. I kept the books for Pa's stables. I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be," he said. "But if you're set on helping, I've got fence posts need mending and a mule that kicks like hell. Might be safer letting you handle the books." She smiled, small but real. "I can handle a mule." He chuckled once under his breath, the sound low and surprised, as if he hadn't laughed in a while. They finished eating in silence. When the bowls were empty, he took her dish without a word and began washing up in a basin near the stove. She watched the way he moved, efficient, quiet, the kind of man who did things once and right. When the dishes were done, he turned to her again. "I'll take the cot tonight." "You can have the bed." She opened her mouth to protest, but he was already unrolling a blanket on the floor beside the hearth. Tomorrow, he said, settling down, we'll ride into town and speak to the clerk, make it legal, proper-like, if that's still what you want. She nodded, her voice soft. It is. Lawson gave a single, slow nod, then reached up to turn down the lamp. The room dipped into quiet shadow, the firelight flickering against the walls. Keziah lay down in the bed he had given her, the sheets rough but clean. Her ankle throbbed, but the rest of her had never known stillness like this. Not in months, maybe not ever. Across the room she could hear the even rhythm of his breath. Not a stranger anymore, but not yet something she could name. She lay awake a long while, listening to the wind in the trees outside and the soft creak of the timbers. Then, slowly, sleep took her, not with fear, not with dread, but with something close to peace. Dawn found Keziah already awake, sitting on the porch step with a wool shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. A meadowlark called from the pine ridge, its song thin in the cool air. Mist clung to the lower branches like breath that hadn't yet faded. Her bare foot rested gingerly on a folded wool sack, the swelling down some but still noticeable. She watched the light creep across the clearing, unsure how long she'd been sitting there. Behind her, the cabin door opened with a soft creak. "You didn't sleep much," Lawson said, stepping out with 2 steaming mugs. She took one with both hands, letting the warmth sink into her fingers. "I tried. Too many thoughts." He sat beside her, the wood groaning slightly beneath his weight. "You want to speak them out loud?" She looked at him, considering. "Not yet, they're still sorting themselves." He nodded and sipped from his mug. The silence between them was easy now, not something to be filled. Just the breeze in the trees and the sound of a horse shifting in the lean-to behind the house. After a while, he spoke again. "I've got a neighbor down the valley, Harlow, runs sheep and keeps to himself. He's the county clerk, too. We'll ride out to him before noon." Keziah turned her cup in her hands. "You trust him. He's a man of his word, and he won't ask questions that don't need answering," she nodded. "Then that's good enough." Lawson stood and disappeared around the side of the cabin. She heard the scrape of metal, boots scuffing earth, then the soft whinny of the gelding. When he returned, he had a saddlebag slung over one arm. "I'll pack some cornbread and dried apricots," she said, rising slowly. "Might take longer than we think if he's out past the ridge." Lawson rubbed the back of his neck. "You sure you're steady enough to stand proper?" "I'm not planning to run races," she said. "I can slice bread." He didn't argue, just held the door open for her and followed her inside. As she wrapped the food in a length of muslin, she glanced at the small shelf above his hearth. A pocket Bible rested there, its leather binding worn soft. Beside it, a carved wooden horse no longer than her hand stood on stiff legs. She nodded toward it. "You carve," he looked up from fastening the saddlebag. "I used to, help settle the mind, it's good work." He shrugged and took the bundle of food from her hands. Some days the hands do better than the head. They rode out by mid-morning, following a narrow trail that wound through stands of spruce and over shallow creeks swollen from spring melt. Keziah sat behind him, her arms looped loosely around his waist, careful not to press when the trail turned sharp. The gelding moved steady beneath them, the saddle leather creaking with every shift in weight. They didn't talk much on the ride. It wasn't needed. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine pitch, and the sun had settled warm on her shoulders by the time Lawson pointed out a cabin nestled in a grove of aspens. Harlow met them at the gate, a broad-shouldered man with a thick gray beard and a limp that dragged slightly when he walked. His face was wary until Lawson dismounted, then it softened into something like familiarity. "Didn't expect you out this early in the season," Harlow said, eyeing Keziah with quiet curiosity. "Need a record drawn," Lawson replied. "Marriage bond." Harlow's gaze lingered on Keziah, but he didn't pry. "Come in. Got ink and a pen that haven't dried out if the mice haven't chewed through the paper." They followed him inside. The front room smelled of pipe smoke and sheep wool. He cleared a space on the table, pulled out a small tin box with a sheaf of documents inside, and dipped the nib into a bottle of ink. "Your name?" he asked Keziah. She answered without hesitation. Her voice didn't waver. Harlow scribbled, then turned to Lawson. "You got means to support her." "I do." "Any objections?" "No," Harlow nodded. "Then it's done." He signed the bottom, then handed over the stub of a candle and a stick of sealing wax. "You'll want to keep this dry. I'll file the rest next time I ride to Missoula." Outside, the sun had risen high, warming the tall grass along the trail. Keziah held the rolled paper carefully beneath her arm as she climbed back onto the horse. Lawson settled in front of her, and they turned back toward the ridgeline. Halfway home, she leaned forward slightly, her chin brushing his shoulder. "Thank you. You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." He didn't speak for a while. "Then you can plant sunflowers near the porch if you like. Soil's good there. My mother used to say they ward off bad spirits." "Probably nonsense, but they look fine when they bloom." Keziah smiled into his back. "I'd like that." They rode on, the wind lifting her hair, the road ahead steady and clear. By week's end, the last frost broke, and the snowmelt from the high banks fed the creek until it ran fast and clear past the edge of the property. Keziah stood barefoot in the garden plot, her hem tucked into her waistband and a spade in her hand, dark earth crumbling between her fingers as she worked. The sun sat mild behind the clouds, and the smell of turned soil and spruce needles clung to the air. Lawson had set fencing tools against the shed earlier that morning, but instead of heading for the pasture, he leaned against the post at the edge of the yard, arms crossed, watching her. "You handle a spade like someone who's done it before," he said. "My mother grew beans and potatoes for lean years. She said a woman needed to know how to coax food from the ground when coin ran thin." Lawson stepped down into the plot, boots pressing soft into the earth. "You planning to put anything else in? Carrots, maybe?" "I saw a patch of wild mint up near the ridge. If I can move some down here, it might take." He knelt beside her, picking up a stray rock and tossing it clear of the row. "You work quiet, so do you." That drew a faint breath from him, almost amused. Keziah straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "I was thinking, we ought to paint the door. It looks like it's been weathered near through. I've got some green wash left over in the shed." "You favor that color?" "I do." She hesitated before adding, "I'd like this place to feel like it's mine, too." Lawson's gaze didn't waver. "It is." Keziah looked down, throat tightening with something that had no name yet. "I want to earn my place here. Not just take up space. You already have." He stood, brushing his hands off. "I've got to ride into Hamilton before the end of the month. There's a new plow blade supposed to come in on the freight wagon." "Will you be gone long?" 2 nights, maybe 3. "Depends on the river crossing." She nodded, trying not to let the weight of that settle too heavy. "I can manage things here." "I know you can, but if you'd rather, I'll bring someone to stay through the worst of it. Widow Ashby's boy helps me sometimes." "He's decent." "I don't want a stranger under the roof while you're gone." Lawson studied her for a long moment. "Then I'll ask Harlow to ride by on the second day." "Just to check in." "That's fair." They fell silent again, the wind threading through the grass, a hawk crying out somewhere high over the hills. Keziah spoke carefully. "You said you came west after the war. Did you leave someone behind?" He didn't answer right away. "No wife." "No kin left worth writing." She waited, giving him room. "My father died before the war ended. My mother passed the spring after. One sister, but she married into a family in Kentucky and never looked back. I reckon I became easier to forget." Keziah turned toward him. "That's not something anyone should carry alone." He met her eyes. "You're not just here because of what happened in Derby, are you?" "I'm here because you didn't ask anything from me, and you gave me a way forward without shame." Lawson nodded once, solemn. "We'll make something steady here." "Not just safe steady." She looked toward the cabin. The windows caught the light from the sky, pale and still. "What will you do when the colder months come?" "Cut wood early, stock beans, flour, salt. Keep the mule from chewing through the harness this time." Keziah laughed softly. "And I'll dry herbs, store roots, stitch new curtains if the fabric holds." Lawson stepped closer. This what we're building, it doesn't have to rush. I don't want it to. He reached for her hand, not with urgency but with quiet surety. She let him take it, the earth-dusted fingers fitting between his like they'd belonged there longer than a week. Neither of them said anything more. They stood side by side in the garden, the wind shifting the branches above, the creek running strong behind them. And in that hush, the beginning of a life took root. The morning Lawson set out for Hamilton, the clouds hung low and thick over the hills, hinting at rain but holding it back. Keziah stood in the doorway with her shawl wrapped tight, watching as he adjusted the saddle straps on the gelding. He'd packed light, just a bedroll, dried meat, and a small pouch of coin tucked beneath the flap. "I filled your flask," she said, handing it to him. "It's strong. Don't drink too fast unless you want to come back with a headache. I'll pace myself." He tucked the flask into his coat and turned back to her. "If the stovepipe clogs again, there's a brush behind the shed. It kicks smoke sometimes when the wind changes. I'll mind it." He hesitated, one hand on the reins, the other resting at his side. "If the mule acts up, then I'll swat his ears and remind him who feeds him." That brought a quiet breath from him, not quite a laugh, but something warmer than silence. He stepped close enough for her to reach for his coat sleeve. She didn't let go. "You'll come back," she said, not as a question. "I will." Keziah lifted her chin, studying his face. "You've been good to me, Lawson. I don't take that lightly. I don't expect you to." Her hand slid down until her fingers laced with his. "But I want to say it." He squeezed her hand once, then bent close. His lips brushed her temple. "You've made this place feel like more than shelter. That's not a small thing." She watched him ride out along the trail, the horses' hooves striking soft against the damp earth, and didn't go back inside until he disappeared behind the line of tamaracks. The first day passed without event. She fetched water from the creek, stitched a tear in the cot blanket, and boiled marrow bones for stock. By afternoon, the wind picked up and clouds pushed harder against the hills, but the rain still held. On the second morning, she woke early, pulled on her boots, and headed out to the pasture. The mule had broken the latch on the gate again, and she found him halfway into Lawson's hay supply. She drove him back with a firm voice and a switch, then spent the next hour mending the fence with a length of twine and a bent nail. By mid-afternoon, hooves sounded on the trail. She stepped out with a rifle tucked under her arm just in case, but lowered it when she saw Harlow approaching on his paint mare. He held a burlap sack in one hand and wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. "Lawson asked me to check in. You're welcome to rest a bit. I've got stew simmering." He dismounted stiffly and followed her inside. She served him a bowl and sat across from him, the fire crackling between them. "He say when he'll be back?" she asked. "Likely tomorrow by nightfall if the river didn't rise too high." They ate in silence for a while, then Harlow cleared his throat. "You settling in all right?" "I am," he nodded. "He's a decent man, got more sense than most. Doesn't say more than needs saying, but what he does say holds." "I've seen that." Harlow finished his stew and leaned back. "You're good for him. He was half talking to ghosts before you came along." "You grounded him." "I didn't do anything he didn't already carry in him." "That may be, but sometimes it takes another person to draw it out." He tipped his hat to her when he left. She stood in the doorway again, watching the sun dip behind the ridge, her hands warm from dishwater and the fire still glowing strong. Lawson returned the following evening just after dusk, his coat damp from a light rain and his horse lathered from the last stretch of trail. Keziah was already on the porch, lantern lit, waiting. "You made good time," she said. "River wasn't bad, got wind of a storm coming, so I pushed to beat it." She stepped forward and took his reins while he dismounted. "You hungry?" "Not yet. Just wanted to see you first. You're soaked." He shook his hat off and leaned close enough to touch her cheek with his fingers. "I missed you." Keziah's breath caught. "I kept the fire going. There's stew on the stove." He nodded but didn't move. "I brought something back." She raised a brow. "That right? He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth. Inside was a folded square of cotton soft blue with white stitching along the edge. I saw it in the dry goods store. Thought maybe you could use it for a Sunday apron. Keziah unfolded it slowly, running her thumb along the hem. It's beautiful, didn't know if the color would suit. It does. She looked up at him, her eyes wide in the lantern light. You thought of me while you were gone. Every mile. She stepped forward, resting her hand against his chest, just over his heart. I've never had someone come back for me. You do now. He took her hand and brought it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. I want more than just a quiet roof and shared chores. I want your laughter in the morning, your voice beside me at night. I want to build something that lasts. She didn't answer with words. She rose on her toes and kissed him, slow and sure. When they parted, her hand rested against his jaw. I'm yours, she said. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her close in the damp night air, the scent of pine and wood smoke rising around them. They went inside, the door closing softly behind them. Years passed, but the days never lost their quiet rhythm. Keziah planted her mint and carrots. The garden flourished. Lawson built her a writing desk from pine boards, and she filled it with letters, pressed flowers, and small, hand-sewn keepsakes. He repaired the roof before the first hard winter, and she kept the hearth warm through every snowstorm. Neighbors came and went. A cradle was carved, a second chair added to the porch, and each night, no matter the season, they turned down the lamp together, hands finding hands in the dark. Their love wasn't loud or hurried. It was steady, like the hills around them, like the river that never stopped running, and it held. Always.